I wouldn't give up the experience of understanding deeply what pain is, what healing can feel like, how resilient we can be, how to find joy in tiny things that I used to not even notice. And I definitely, when I never had, I don't know, this is kind of weird, but when my kids were little or having a tantrum or screaming in the bathtub or something, I really, I just appreciated every minute of it. I think it made me deeply appreciate being a mom. And 99.9% of the time I could stay like just right there in the moment with them. I loved it. We would do like imagination stories and this, that, and the other. And just to be so in the moment, I think was a gift that grief gave me.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we will be listening to Emma Payne's story. Emma is the founder and CEO of Grief Coach. It's a website that supports people in their grief journey. She has started as an entrepreneur in technology. She's an MIT graduate and then now has combined her two passions of technology as well as grief support with what she does. So we'll be learning and hearing more about her story. So welcome, Emma.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining. And as I shared here, I just said a little bit of snippets there about you, but I will be learning just as the listeners are as we go along here. So tell me where you live and a little bit about your family and then how you got into, studying in MIT and that line of work. So start with the family and where you live, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'm on the West Coast with my teenagers in Seattle, and MIT. Yeah, that was a trip. It was just as hard as everybody says it would be. I was the only person in my program, I believe, who wasn't already an engineer, so it was very, very difficult. But I survived it.
Yeah, you're here. Or are we talking about, is that maybe what the grief experience was?
No,
Was
that came later.
that came after. It was not like the surviving being in MIT.
No, no.
I'm sure that was a big shift too. Did you grow up in Seattle?
No, I've lived all
Oh,
over the place. I was born in England when I was a baby. My parents moved to Zambia, then Algeria, then back to England, then immigrated to Canada. So I was a kid who moved around a lot.
oh.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. That always intrigues me, and I ask this to other people, like in terms of the moving, because for some people they live in one place for so many years and then they move, and then there's definitely a big shift. I know that was for me when I moved to the States initially, because I came when I was 18, and then from there on, then I started moving every 5 to 6 years, pretty much changing states. But for somebody that's grown up that way in moving, do you feel that transitions like moves are just easier for you in general because it's something you're just used to doing?
If you'd asked me that question 2 years ago, I would have said yes, absolutely. I'm just sort of good at it, and I can manage the upheaval um, pretty well. But today I would give you a different answer because the whole, now I have teenagers.
Hmm.
The pandemic is really, really difficult. for us in lots of ways. Online school, co-parenting across a closed border. I mean, so now I'm sort of feeling the opposite. I am feeling some degree of envy for people who really feel grounded and at home in one place. And I have
Mm.
um, people scattered across a lot of places, and that's really hard with the pandemic, right? Because you just haven't been able to see and get the support from the people that we wanted. So
Such a good point and insight on that. It's true. Like we don't have anybody where we live either, and the same. The border wise, I also have when you said border is there the children's parent in in
Canada, yeah.
Canada. Yeah.
Hmm.
So my brother recently moved to Canada, and then my in-laws live in Colombia, and so land wise, like the only ones we could like just drive to see were the ones that live in Florida. So,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's just
is
been
definitely.
difficult. And I think, I mean, I just read that 25% of Americans moved last year, something like that.
Mm,
So I'm not alone. I think that
mm-hmm,
a lot of people who had been more nomadic with their
mm-hmm.
choices really, yeah, really realized that they needed to be as close as possible to the people that support and love them. So it's been, um, it's been a time.
It's definitely been unique. I'll be if FYI, if the listeners end up hearing like like sound in the background, it ended up being that the lawn mowing people they're mowing my lawn right now. So, it, so if you see me mute Emma, just know that it's so that it doesn't end up picking up as much. So, um, but anyway, thank you for sharing that. So your teenagers are how old now? I have teenagers as well. How old are your teenagers?
13 and 15.
Oh, we have close. Mine are 13 and 14.
Oh wow. Well, my
Yeah.
15-year-old only became 15 about 3 weeks ago. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, or 4 weeks ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely definitely different. I've loved it so far. I've for me it's been a good experience so far with teenagers, but I don't see them or talk to them as much. I was telling them this morning to my son cuz my dog is the only one that lets me hug her and cuddle her. And I was telling him, I'm like, she's the only one that lets me kiss her and take pictures of her and everything. And nobody else lets me do that anymore.
Yeah, true. It's a
So, anyway,
change.
it is a change. Okay. So, you studied at MIT, you studied technology. So, how long did you work in that field before? And then you started then developing different apps and things like that, or
Yeah.
different. So, tell us about
Yeah.
that journey and how that then took
Sure.
you into now the area of the Grief Coach website.
Sure. So I have been working in technology for about, I don't know, 25 years by the time I started Grief Coach. I started my first web company before Netscape existed. um, and so I was very, very early into web. And I had spent decades developing all kinds of mobile and online applications for things like um, getting young people registered to vote. I founded an organization that was all about getting women into technology and ran that for 3 years. It went on for 17 years before it was acquired. So I was really proud of that work. So I had a long technology career. Um, but I also had spent about 10 years working as a volunteer and off the side of my desk, and sometimes a few consulting projects in grief and loss, particularly around suicide prevention, crisis intervention, things like that. So in 2015, my friend died, and he was the best friend and also second cousin of my first husband, who had died by suicide 10 years earlier. So when my friend died, he had asked me to speak at his funeral, and I said, yes, of course I would. But after he died, I was really nervous about that because it did mean flying across the country and seeing a lot of people who I hadn't heard from when my first husband died. And that was nerve wracking. So, but in the end, I feel like that was a real gift from my friend because I spent 72 hours starting with the minute I sat down in the pew with people saying, "Oh my goodness, you're Emma, you're Barry's widow. I'm so sorry I didn't reach out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know anyone who had died before. Then so much time passed, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't reached out. Essentially, people had genuinely had cared about me, but they just didn't know what to do. And so on my plane ride home from the funeral, and again, by this point, I'd spent 20 something years building mobile and online platforms. So on my plane ride home, I just thought, this is so silly. Like, I spent 10 years not hearing from people, and that was really hard. But 100 people spent 10 years feeling bad about that, genuinely feeling ashamed, guilty, um, sad, unsure, all of that. So I just thought, okay, well, if we can use our phones for every other thing, we must be able to use it for grief support too. So I basically used my plane ride to map out all of Grief Coach. It's a text messaging platform. And I thought that by the time we landed at SeaTac, I would get online and I would see that it existed already. But then we landed and I got onto Wi-Fi and I saw there was nothing. There were not grief apps. There was no text support. There was not anything out there like that. I was shocked, actually. Um,
Mm.
so that's when I.
So it was built based out of a need. What you realized there was a need, and if you would have had even that 10 years prior,
Mm-hmm,
um, right when you were going through your
mm-hmm,
own grief process, so you
yeah,
built it out of that
and I
need.
yeah, and I wanted to build something that was support for the griever, but that also
Mhm.
was support for the friends and family who wanted to help and didn't know how. And now, 6 years later, I'm certain that that's really where a lot of the magic happens. We're never going to have
Mhm.
enough therapists. And even if we did, not everybody can afford $150 an hour for therapy. And not everybody wants that kind of experience. And we're never going to have enough support groups in every possible location. And even if we did, a lot of people don't want to share their story with a room full of strangers. But I have not met anybody, not one single person, who doesn't want their husband, best friend, sister to understand a bit more of what they're going through and to be patient and supportive. Everybody wants that. So I think that the way that we send text messages to the griever and to their people is pretty cool.
So
Yeah.
tell me, walk us through that a little bit then. So when somebody signs up for Grief Coach, let's say I am a friend, like I'm just the supporting person of a griever, and
Mm-hmm.
I sign up for a Grief Coach.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of text messages would I get that would help me then guide me as to how it is I support my friend? And do you select if you're the griever, or is it like you
Yeah.
select what type of texting you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly right. So we have hundreds of expert contributors with a real depth of wisdom in, some of them stillbirth, some of them suicide, some of them sibling loss, parent loss, losing your mother when you are a mother, all kinds
Mhm.
of expertise. And we create a whole network of messages that are customized based on cause of death, relationship, age. We have a teen series, for example, and a series for people who are widowed young, and so on. So it takes about 5 minutes to sign up. You share as much or as little as you want to about your loss or your friend's loss, and your texts start right away for you and the supporter. So if you're the supporter, you're going to get, here's a 1 minute video about things that your friend who just had a stillbirth might be experiencing. Here's a resource site, here's a tip, all the different ways that we're going to help you help her.
Yes. Yes.
But then at the same time, she is getting her own messages about a stillbirth loss in this example, and so on. I use this example a lot because one of our very first subscribers was a woman whose baby was stillborn, first child, and I describe her as um, deeply grieving, but also really feeling alone, almost like
Mhm.
preoccupied with how alone she felt, which I now realize is very, very, very common, right? So she was
Mhm.
saying things like, my husband's drinking too much and he won't even talk about the baby. My best friend flew across the country to be with me, but she just left because she said she doesn't know how to be with me when I'm like this.
Mhm.
So there she is with the nursery all decorated and expecting to have time off work, but instead she's really alone. So she bought a subscription to Grief Coach. She filled in her information, took 5 minutes, and she added in her husband and her best friend so that she would get messages for her own grief, but that her best friend and her husband would also get texts and suggestions. And like 2 days later, we got a message back from that best friend, the one who got on the plane. And she said, "Thank you so much for understanding. This is hard for me too. I don't know what to do."
Mm.
And that's the experience that I had at the church, right? Where people were like, "I
Mm.
don't know what to do." So people are usually so grateful and relieved when someone just gives them a little bit of comfort and confidence about how to proceed, because everybody knows that just sending someone a bunch of flowers or putting a note on Facebook is not as much as they want to do for their grieving person.
Mhm.
Um, in my experience, people are good and we really want to help. We just
Yes.
honestly don't. We just honestly and truly
Do
are
not know how.
fearful and don't know how. So the messages we send are very, I mean, they're texts, right? So it's quite short. It's not a lot to read or process. It's tips, reminders. Tomorrow would have been, the birthday, things like that. We had
Mm.
a woman named Rachel who posted on Twitter. She had signed up for a subscription. And she said, thank you for the messages you've been sending since my mom died. It's really helping me. But I really want to thank you for the messages you're sending my husband because he's being more patient with me now. And
Mm.
he is like, oh, thank you so much. I had no idea tomorrow would have been her mom's birthday. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just
Right.
using that
Right.
as an
Right.
example from all of the people, but like the supporter is like, oh, thank you. I didn't know that. Or,
I
oh,
didn't
okay,
add
I'll
that
do
to
that.
my calendar. Now I know that I that's gonna be a tough week for that person, so let me kinda check in on them more frequently because it may be a tough week or
Mm-hmm.
day because that special day is coming up. That is just
Mm-hmm.
that's so good because you can add a whole bunch of network and in the same subscription, you can add all these within
Mm-hmm.
that same
It's
subscription, you
all
can add
included. Mm-hmm.
all
So
included. That
one
is beautiful.
subscription includes messages for up to 5 people. Usually that's the griever and up to 4 friends and family. You
That's
don't
wonderful.
have to. We have sometimes where it's just the supporters. Like we had a woman so there was this group of girlfriends. They've known each other forever, and their friend's daughter died by suicide, and it was just tragic. And the mom was just devastated, couldn't get out of bed. And so the girlfriends signed up themselves, and for a whole year they got suggestions about how to help their friend. They never even told the friend about it.
Mhm.
It was just for them, how do you support someone after a suicide loss? What are things that we can do because
So
we love her?
That is that is so needed. It's interesting because those are some of the calls I get more frequently. Is
Mm-hmm.
people it's not as much that I get from friends that are actually grieving that call me, but it's the ones that are the friends of
Mm-hmm.
friends that have lost some that they're like, "I don't Kendra,
I
what do
don't
I
know what
tell
to
them?
do.
Why do I don't know what to do?" So yeah, I had a friend that said, "Can you meet with myself and this other friend? We're trying to support our friend and we don't know how. So it is
Mm-hmm.
definitely something that is needed. And like you said, people want to help
Mm-hmm.
and be there, but don't know how. I can even say that, even personally, as somebody that's been through grief myself so many times, that sometimes I even don't even know what is the right way of serving that particular person, even
Mm-hmm.
though I've been through it myself, because everybody's so unique and what they may need is different than maybe what you needed yourself, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But having these kind of resources and tips is
Yeah.
so helpful. So, for the listeners, as you're listening to this, make sure to check in the show notes because Emma's given us a code for you to get a discount. So just make sure to check that out and click on there if you feel that this could be something that, and I'm saying it now before we end because in case people don't end up listening to the end, I want to make sure you check the show
Yeah.
notes. You
Yeah.
get $10 off. Mhm.
And you can use the subscription for yourself, or you can use the same code to buy it as a gift. People do that as
For
well.
somebody.
It's a very thoughtful um, sympathy gift. It's really
Beautiful.
like it's at the beginning people said, "Oh my gosh, your job must be so depressing." I'm like, "No, it's the opposite."
Mm.
Because people die.
Yes.
But, and that we can't, that's always going to be. What we can change is if we're going to learn, all of us, how to be there for each other. And so the gratitude that comes into my inbox is really quite amazing. And some of the situations, some of the people are in the depths of grief, but they're still so grateful
Mm.
that someone has heard them, or someone is helping their mom understand, how to support a grieving teenager. Because the grieving teenager is like, I don't know what to say. I don't know. People want to help, but I don't know. It's not my job to help other people help me. So we
Mhm.
do that work
Mhm.
for them. And people are so gracious and courageous.
That's wonderful. Now take us then a little into your own journey then, because so and then 2005 approximately then is when your husband Barry um
Yeah. So he
he
died.
by suicide. He died by
So
suicide.
I was 20, I was 19 when I met him, 26 when I married him, and 31 when he died. So it was my
Mhm.
whole life, really, my whole 20s. Um, were with him, the first serious relationship I'd had. Um,
Mhm.
and we were young when we met. He was 33 when he died. Um, it was the first person I had ever known to die by suicide. I was completely and utterly um, destroyed. So
Mm.
I
And
remember,
so young. So
yeah,
that's like not like young it's like super young, ultra young widow with the 20, you were 31, right?
mm-hmm,
31 and yeah. And no, you
31.
the two of you didn't have children
No,
in your relationship. Mhm.
no. And that I was sad about for the first few years,
Mhm.
but now I understand that that's
The
just as
wisdom
well.
behind it. Uh-huh. The
Yeah,
wisdom behind it.
yeah.
So so then you mentioned how some of these then friends were not didn't know how to support you. So what did you use as your grieving tools then?
Mhm.
Your friends didn't know how to reach out. Was your
Well,
family around? Did you
yeah,
what was
I was extraordinarily lucky and blessed. And this is the thing that I've written about and talked about a lot. Like, I was very lucky. I was in the slim percentage of people that had resources available, and it still was brutal,
Mhm.
right? And when we look around now at people that don't even get a few days off work when a child dies, I mean, we have legislation in front of that the U.S. is considering right now about legislating 5 days of bereavement leave, and so I've been part of that work with Evermore in DC, like trying to make basic supports
And it's basic
scalable,
because 5 days, yeah.
right? Like scalable, available, thoughtful support available for as many people as possible. Because I was very lucky. I was living in the UK. What Barry and I were living in the UK when he died. I moved back to Canada, and my girlfriends, found me a place to stay, poured me into the backseat of a car and drove me to this counseling place they'd found that gave me free one-on-one support specific to suicide grief for like
Mm,
3 years. For every Wednesday,
wonderful.
I just like collapsed into this therapist's office. And I feel that it was life changing, that
Wonderful.
experience, and how lucky I was. I couldn't have afforded it. I had an amazing person who I'd worked with in the past who gave me a job that I could do flexibly. And if I needed to go and cry in the bathroom, that's what was going to happen. So, I mean, my sister moved across the country to live with me, and her boyfriend came too. So I had family, I had incredible girlfriends
Mm,
with me, I had a flexible work situation. So the experience of the people in the other city where
where
my
he
friend and
had
husband
husband.
had grown
Mhm.
up,
Mhm.
it was harder for them because they weren't right there in the same city as me. Trying
Mhm.
to, it was shocking for them. Here it is, like their high school friend has like died by suicide. I mean, it was an extraordinary thing for everybody. So I
Mhm.
understood, and I think this is a big part of why Grief Coach is special to me because we have to come in on the side of the supporters. Every time I see like, oh, top 10 things never to say to someone who's grieving, I think this is not helping. We just scare people that they might
Mhm.
say the wrong thing and then they won't say anything.
Correct.
What I did,
Yeah, it's
what I
better to say
discovered,
something even if it's the wrong
yeah.
thing. Yeah,
So,
than to
so
not
we
say it.
send texts to people
Yeah.
like all sorts of things to support them in that. Like, don't worry if you fumble or say the wrong thing. Your friend's not even going to remember what you said. They're just going to remember that you tried. That's it.
Mhm, mhm,
Don't feel
mhm,
as if you have to cheer someone up. You cannot cheer her up. Her husband just died. If she
mhm,
cries, consider it a compliment. It doesn't, like just really try to bolster people's understanding because this is what I learned at the funeral, right? That people were good. They wanted to help. They didn't know how. And we're not born knowing how to do this. And we've become
mhm.
so distant from death and grief that we've just, no one shows us.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
taboo topic, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
until we normalize a conversation about death, the fact like we're fine with the fact of knowing somebody's going to be born and the day they're
Mm-hmm.
going to be born and this and that. But the fact of the death component, which is also a certainty, it's more
Mm-hmm.
certain than even birth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's
It's
more
true, actually. Yeah.
because birth, you don't know the well, yeah, the same. Like you can't even know the dates. You can't know the dates also when you're leaving this body, but still,
No, but it's a
it's something we don't
certainty.
talk
One of
about.
our expert contributors is a woman named Dora Carpenter, and she says, um, we teach people how to evacuate the building if there's an earthquake, because that might happen, right? But we
Oh my
don't
gosh, I'm sorry. This is hilarious because it's so true.
Yeah,
How
but
many
we
times our
don't
kids
teach but we don't teach people what to say to someone who's grieving, which will definitely happen many, many times. So we
yeah.
just don't do it. And that's, I think, why people are just really grateful for our texts. It's just like, here, you don't have to read a textbook or sit in a room with strangers or anything. We're just going to basically deliver the best wisdom that we can find from hundreds and hundreds of experts around the world. And we're going to send it to your phone in your language all year long, personalized based on the loss. And people are like, oh, thank you. you know?
Now that you're saying this, actually, let's talk about that language and because it's text. Which countries do you serve?
So we
And
are
because it's and what
global.
languages? Uh-huh.
Yeah. So we're delivering text globally with a few exceptions. New Zealand, we are struggling with, but mostly we deliver anywhere in the world. So we have subscribers in Mexico, South Africa, El Salvador, US, Canada, Australia, all over. We're now delivering in English, Spanish, Hmong, Tagalog, because we launched a big series for
In Philippines.
clinicians and
Mhm.
people working in healthcare. And a huge portion of that are from the Philippines, so we're really pleased with that. That was really a nice thing. We were very proud of that launch. Polish. What am I forgetting? I think that's all right
That's
now, and we're adding
wonderful.
lots of new ones. Yeah, but it's
Wonderful.
available globally in English. You can get it in any of those languages anywhere in the world.
That is wonderful. And then the texting, how does that is no extra fee for the texting service internationally or anything like that. It's just the
Yeah,
same
it's the
amount.
same price.
That is wonderful. What a wonderful service, and the fact that somebody can receive it in their native tongue.
I think
You
it's
know
nice. Yeah,
that
we've
is
been
so good.
launching like 2021. We launched different languages. We launched a new service text channel with working again with experts around caregiving. So depending what cause of death you put, we ask you, were you a caregiver to that person? Because then there's all the grief there of like survivor's
Hmm.
guilt, all this different things. So a caregiver series, a veterans series. Yeah, like our body of tech support now is really beautiful, I
That
think.
is, it is beautiful, and this all started from going to your friend's funeral in 2015 that you
yeah,
this idea came out in the airplane, you're jotting this
yeah,
down. So
I
then
know.
from that from that kind of coming through you onto a paper, then to developing, how long was that process?
Yeah. So I basically took a third of my salary for, so I was working as an executive in a technology company. So I just took a third of my salary for a couple of years and used that to actually build the platform. So I was lucky that I had a good job then and had talked to my CEO about it. So he knew um, what I was working on.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I spent a couple of years getting it all totally built and ready, and then I didn't quit my job until it launched, which was February 2019. So as we went live, I quit my full time job and have been doing this ever since. And it's been, of course, I had no idea there was going to be a global pandemic a year later. So we had just the first of 2019, we were doing consumer subscriptions. People find us on Instagram, sign up, gift subscriptions. That fall, we had started to build packages for hospices. So in the US, hospices are required to provide 13 months of bereavement care. We realized this is like this really amazing, easy, cheap way for them to support all the families in their care. So we had just launched that, and then COVID hit, and then everything had to pause while we added a new cause of death to the system, which I never imagined doing that March. And then, of course, healthcare was just upside down. We started getting packages of subscriptions purchased by, there was like a police department in Florida who was trying to support their own employees, a flooring company where the vice president died, and they wanted to support all the colleagues
Mm.
as well as his family. Hospices started coming on board, children's hospitals that have bereavement teams, because the need, like, I mean, Kendra, you know this, like, the need is so immense.
Yes.
We're talking like 1 in 4 American workers right now are grieving a recent loss.
Hmm.
And we know we have all the data that tells us, and this is just talking about one country,
Yes.
when we have all the data that tells us that when we're grieving, we're at increased risk for anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and behaviors. Life expectancy reduces for parents who lose a child. You're at risk for lost wages, sleeplessness, substance use. I mean, bereavement is
It's
hard.
huge.
It's
It's huge.
hard, 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 hard. But when we're supported in our grief, all of those negative outcomes are reduced. So
Hmm.
it's like, here's this incredible, vast need. At the same time, we have wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. Like now I work with, hospice bereavement managers, all kinds of experts, psychiatrists. We know how to help when someone is grieving. So we have all this world of wisdom. We have this immense need. And I really see grief coach as just one way of connecting those two things. Take the wisdom, put it into people's hands, literally, when they need it. And when people are supported, they're less at risk for all the things that often accompany grief.
You mentioned so many different things here that I want to just talk a little bit about. Let's start with the fact of having to add then COVID as the reason of
Yeah, that
death,
was,
right? To
yeah.
that. So when somebody then is supporting someone that was the cause, then is that like a whole even other chapter per se of the, how you have the teen support, that this particular cause of death have a whole other layer with it because of
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
even the trauma that
Mm-hmm.
they're still living with in our world, that is still
Mm-hmm.
kind of being faced and remembering that
Yeah.
reason
When
over
we
and over
first, so
again.
we originally launched the series in March of 2020
Mhm.
and worked with Virginia Mason's grief services team because they were early, because some of the very first deaths in the country were in Seattle in February. So
Mhm.
they were already seeing the particular challenges that
Yes.
survivors of people who had lost someone
Yep.
to COVID were experiencing. So stigma, frustration with the policy, seeing it in the news constantly, friends that wouldn't wear masks. Meanwhile, the person had just died, not being able to have a funeral, not even seeing the
Correct.
person at the end. So
Mhm.
there's all of this.
Mhm.
Um, all of this that we started trying to build text messages and supports around, again for the griever, but also for the people around them to say,
Mhm.
what was being learned early on. And then in the year and a half since then, we've added um, lots more to that series. We get quite a lot of COVID deaths at Grief Coach. Um, we also get a lot of child loss, people losing a parent young, suicides. Yesterday the woman that signed up, her son died. It was a homicide. I think that we get a lot of what we call out of order losses. The more stigma, the more trauma, the more alone a person feels, the more they're looking for different ways of getting support and feeling less alone. Like my mission in life and what I
Yes.
wrote on the plane was that no one should ever grieve alone.
Yes.
And we can make that happen if we all learn how to support each other.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's like the knowing that there's these tools, first of all, because that's the thing. A lot of us, when we're in the middle and thick of the grief,
Mm-hmm.
we don't even sometimes know that there are tools out there, that there
No,
are
you couldn't. I
resources.
couldn't. I
Yeah.
could not read even a paragraph of a book for a year after my husband died. I couldn't read. I couldn't take anything in,
Right.
and
Right. That's
that is not unique. Yeah.
yeah. So it's that you're not sometimes even in that place of even wanting to even know what you're supposed to do in that moment yourself. So the part of the others around you kind of knowing is what how to support you in that moment of grief is
Your
probably
listeners can't see your hands, right?
oh
Just kidding. I was
man.
doing it too. I'm like all around.
Okay, if the listeners, the ones that know me that are listening to this, they know that yes, I talk with my hands and it is really challenging for me not to talk. So yes, I was moving my arms around saying like everyone around you. That was the description of of my movements. Yeah, if I had video then they'd know.
Yeah.
Um
But
but
that is what I do
yeah.
think is the magic of what we're doing. I really do. I'm
Mhm.
proud of the grief support we send. I'm thrilled when someone feels that the messages we're sending them are helping them with their grief. But I feel
Mhm.
really, really good when I hear the supporter or the person saying how a supporter is a better help. Because, I mean, although we use technology to deliver the tips, ultimately our goal is for people to get
To
support from the
connect.
people around them in the real
Mhm.
world and to
Yes,
connect in the way that we want to, because that's how we
we
navigate
need.
grief,
Yes. Yes.
connected with the people around us, not through technology. We want
Right.
it's pretty clear what people want, and they want that connection,
They
understanding,
need
and patience
connection.
for the
It's
people around
connection.
them. Yeah.
It's connection, yeah. The nonprofits that the nonprofit that I volunteer with as well, like it's that connection, connecting with others that have gone through a similar experience. People are there, with others that are living the same thing, similar to you being able to receive that type of support for 3 years when you were in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
by an
So lucky.
individual. Like there's group settings as well like that that people can get. Um that are free. And if that's not, if and then so that's one layer. Then there's these layers of of texting coaching tips. Then there's layers of podcasts. There's layers of books out there. This, depending on the person, everybody can get a multifaceted approach to support their grief. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, comes the family, the friends, all these other people that are
Mm-hmm.
there to help
we
you.
had we had like a really cool story about, so I think it was in May of this year. A woman named Anne renewed her subscription, and she had already renewed it once. So she was basically beginning her third year of getting text, which was a huge thing for us because we had only launched that many times that long ago. Um, so I pinged her, which I don't normally reach out to subscribers, but I was just like, "Hi, I just saw that you renewed for third year. Like, that's so awesome. If you'd be willing to chat with me, I'd love to hear about your experience." And she agreed. So her name is Anne. She's in her 20s, and she grew up living on top of a funeral home. Her dad was a funeral director, and her mom was worked in hospice, and her sister was like a bereavement counselor. Unbelievable, right?
That's crazy. Sorry,
And
I'm
so,
like I'm commenting here with my head because as you can hear, the lawnmower like next to they're mowing right next to me this second. That is crazy.
so
So all these funeral
So
home,
dad, yeah, her dad's a funeral
bereavement
director. Her mom worked
counselor,
in hospice, and her sister was a bereavement
hospice,
counselor. So
incredible.
when she was in her 20s, her sister died, and she lived in rural Pennsylvania, small town Pennsylvania. And she said to me, "I knew exactly what kind of grief support is available in my town. Right? Grew up with that. I see the brochures that my dad delivers to people's mailboxes and so on." So she said that she knew that that was not what she wanted. And so she found Grief Coach on Instagram and signed up. And she added in a friend who's a friend of her sister's who was also going to get those supporter texts that we've been talking about. And she said that early on, we sent a text which had a link to a TED talk by a woman named Nora McInerney.
Yep.
And
Yep. That
so,
you
Anne,
move forward. You don't move
yeah,
on from your grief. You move
exactly.
forward with it.
So we sent Nora's TED talk to Anne, who's there
Hmm.
grieving alone in rural Pennsylvania in her like mid 20s, right? And she had never heard of Nora's work before, but she was felt like really a connection to the TED talk. And
Yes.
so she decided to buy Nora's book. So she bought Nora's book, and then she said, "Oh, that's all my computer beeping at me." So she bought Nora's book, and then Nora wrote two more books, and she bought those books too. And she was saying,
Go
and I
ask
was like,
go tell Nora you need that
yeah,
referral for those 2 books, 3 books that she bought
three
because
books.
of that TED Talk you sent
But
her.
it's so cool to your point, what you're saying about how people use different things. Different things
Yes.
work for different people and different mediums at different times. So it's really amazing. I think that we, like this morning, I heard back from one of our subscribers who said, "Oh my gosh, thank you for this text. It really resonated with me." And that was a text that was crafted by another one of our contributors. Her name is Lucinda Koza, and she is well known for her work around millennials and caregiving.
Mm.
So we send a resource to someone who is grieving the loss of someone who they were a caregiver to with that wisdom. She's like, "Oh, thank you. This really touched me." Right. And Anne is saying, "Hey, that TED talk particularly resonated and it led me to this book. And now I've renewed my subscription 3 times and the friend is still always wants to be part of it." Everyone finds their way with different
That's
kinds
so
of content. And it's now I'm the one using my hands.
yeah, there you go.
But
You see? Are you do you also have Italian in you? Is that why? Because that's why I talk with my hands. That is just
yeah.
amazing because, yes, you're not only sending the text, but you're also then offering these other channels for them to get further support. Like you said, that TED Talk video. Then from there, if that ends up speaking to that person, like you said, then this person ended up buying the book and then another one and yeah, you just kind of get an idea of um more tools that can be used.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting that this person, even though she'd grown up with this type of knowledge of what was out there for support, that she knew that that didn't speak to her for
Mm-hmm.
her grief, and that she needed something different. So yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and all these different journeys.
Yeah, it's a
Now,
cool
what are
story.
things? Yes, thank you. Now, what other things for you, back to for your own grief journey, aside from the um therapy that you went to for those 3 years, what other tools did you find helpful back when it was early on in your grief?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, I had an amazing sister, Hannah, who came and lived with me, and I had two girlfriends, Shannon and Allison, who were incredible. So I had people to cry with.
Mm.
I had expert support from the therapist that I had. I had an understanding job.
Yes,
I did
support. So
find,
yeah, you really have a
I did
support
find
system.
creative expression for me was important. So I wrote songs. I would play like loud music with my band and like try and just like let it out. Um, I think that that was healing for me. I needed to just sort of scream, yell, express. I had a lot of feelings bottled up. I spent a whole year after Barry died thinking of myself almost as a murderer, you
Mm.
know. So just anger, guilt, rage, shame, all of it needed to come out. So creative expression was really, I think, very healthy and healing for me, and also just being able to share with a few
with
people
others.
around me. Yeah.
Now, how did you translate having learned that into then your parenting? Has having lived through grief, your children, of course, that they never met your first husband because that's not
Hmm.
who they knew, but um have you shared, for example, that experience with them now that they're teens about your grief journey and been open with them about all these different emotions? Like, does that make sense
Hmm.
what I'm saying? Like, how did that
Hmm.
translate into your interpersonal relationships aside from, of course, it impacting what you do now for for a living, but
Hmm.
how did it impact you?
Um, it's hard to say because I don't know what I would have been like
Ah,
otherwise.
different, right, right,
You know,
true, true.
I do know that when I was pregnant with my first child, I think the answer is that it permeates everything
Mm,
because it just made me like so. Um, I mean, I think I was an empathetic person before, and parenting already kind of blows your
yes.
heart into pieces, and you feel like your heart's living out your body. And there wasn't that much of a gap between from Barry's death until my first child was born was 5 years. So the grief was still very much with me and heavy for me. Um, so I don't know, and I'll
Mhm.
never know, but I think that loss was very profound as an experience and not one I would actually change. I mean, of course, I would
Mm.
bring Barry back, but I wouldn't give up the experience of understanding deeply what pain is, um, what healing can feel like, how resilient we can be, how to find joy in tiny things that I used to not even notice. Um, and I definitely, when I never had, I don't know, this is kind of weird, but when my kids were little or having a tantrum or screaming in the bathtub or something, I really, I, I just appreciated every minute of it. I think it made me deeply appreciate being a mom. And 99.9% of the time I could stay like just right there in the moment with them. I loved it. We would do like imagination stories and this, that, and the other. And just to be so um, in the moment, I think was a
So
gift that grief
beautiful.
gave me. Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that,
I don't think
and you're
anyone's ever
right.
asked me that before. I do a lot of interviews and I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. So
I
now I
feel
would have to
honored.
think about it.
Well,
But
I
I,
feel honored that that was the first time that you heard it. As I told you when we were starting this, that I don't prepare I don't prepare what I'm going to ask. It just kind of comes from whatever I'm receiving. So,
mm-hmm.
uh,
It's a great
and
question.
so I thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that because it is so true. It does kind of crack you open to just another level. Like it's and you're right. It's not like you want to say that you're glad that this person died in your life, but it's that if they hadn't, you wouldn't be who you are now if that experience had not
Mm-hmm.
happened. And
And it's
so
just very,
so
um,
raw.
very grounding and powerful in
Yes.
a way, right? And it gives me a kind of like confident, like I can get through things.
Mm.
I really, really do not like. There's like this leak in my ceiling a couple of years ago, and it turned into this huge thing. Like they were tearing off the sides. It was this huge square of stuff. I had just launched like Grief Coach. I didn't have like money for it. People around me were like, "Oh my gosh, it's terrible." I'm like, "What? What? Don't even notice. I don't care. I
It
couldn't
puts
care. I
things
just
into
couldn't make
perspective.
myself
Yeah,
care about the hole in my ceiling that was getting bigger
right.
and bigger. It was like this huge square was cut out, and everything was tarped all around, and I just didn't care.
Because
I was like,
it's
"Well,
like
just get
putting
it
life in
fixed."
perspective. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
putting life in perspective, the priorities of what yeah, what really is important for you. Like you said, even with the kids having a tantrum, I can't say that I was like you, even though I had already experienced grief prior to
I'm
being a mom. I can't say that
I'm
that was
probably
my
making
case.
myself sound better than it really was in
I
retrospect. But
I can't say that I was like, "Oh, yay, they're having a tantrum. Woo, I'm
yeah,
present." I
yeah,
can't say that was my case. But,
like not
but
100% of
there's
the time, but yeah.
but no, it just again, it shifts for everybody differently, right? Grief shifts each of us
I
differently.
see people so stuck all the time, because the tile is chipped in the shower, or I just like we're all gonna die, right?
Yeah.
We're here now, and we're not always going to be here and healthy with each other. So that is a real gift. And now I have the gift of working in bereavement managers at hospices. All the people I work with are the same:
Mm,
grounded, present, happy, thoughtful.
mm,
That's what I mean. There's all this wisdom. We have the
mm.
wisdom, and it's interesting to think of text messaging as a way to transfer wisdom, but I actually think it can, because it's small amounts for a long time, right? It's not like knowledge sharing where I'm just going to like tell you something and you're suddenly going to know it. It's wisdom over
Little
time,
doses. Yeah, little
little
doses.
doses,
Do they
and
get it
wisdom
once
from
a
lots of
week?
places. It's at least
Once a
twice a
week?
week. Yeah,
Twice a week,
minimum
okay.
twice a week, extra on anniversary dates, special holidays. If you
Mhm.
tell us that Rosh Hashanah is important to you, then you get messaged around with that. The anniversary of the death, the person's birthday, what would have been your wedding anniversary if you lost a partner. So it's a minimum twice a week for each of the 5 people in the subscription.
That is wonderful, and
It's a
it's
lot.
max 5 people. That's 5 people,
Mm-hmm.
that's in one subscription. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's a
That's
lot,
amazing, and it's a
right?
great and I know, it's a great deal, by the way, too, for a year subscription, so, you guys can
It's
check it
like
out.
way less than an hour's therapy, right? For
Oh, yeah,
you and four of
it
your
is.
friends and family to get support from like a network of experts for a year. So that's my goal, is to keep it affordable. It costs money. Every time we deliver, we're charged by character, by translation. So just trying to keep it affordable and available for everybody is
It's
part of
yeah,
what
it's
it's
like a
all about.
service. It's a way of serving. It's a way of serving, people, so thank you for doing that, and it's grief.coach.com. Is that
Nope,
correct?
just
Oh,
grief.coach.
grief.coach.
Yep, that's it.
Grief.coach.
And
Okay.
if you go to grief.coach and use the code GGG podcast, you will get $10 off. Or you can just go to grief.coach/GGG podcast.
Yeah, that's what
Um,
we that GGG, the grief, gratitude, and the grave. We just do we made it simpler for y'all. GGG podcast, and again, the link will be and I'm doing my finger here with the pointing down as I'm here with my hands talking. The 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 link will be below, and thank you again, Emma, for doing that for the
yeah,
listeners.
you're
And
welcome. I
again,
hope that it's helpful for people.
you're helping already so many people, but I know even where to direct now others when they contact me of saying, "What do I do for for my friend?" and having this as a tool that they can access for themselves
Oh,
to know
great.
what
Yeah,
to
that'd
say
be
to their
great.
friends. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything I did not ask that you still want to share? Did I?
Um, I don't think so. You asked lots of questions. No, I'm good.
Okay, good.
No, it was a pleasure.
Good.
Thanks for the questions, and you've given me something to think about in terms of the parenting piece for sure. It's uh, it's definitely actually my girlfriend just said like last week, and this is one of the girlfriends, Shannon, who was really part of my early journey. But I was talking about how I always said back then in my 30s as a new widow, I was like, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to be one of those people that spends all their time talking about grief forever and ever. And here I am, like
This is
20
what
years,
you
20 years later. But Shannon said, she's like, yeah, but it doesn't define you.
do.
It's not all that you are. I was
Uh-huh.
like, okay, yeah, you're right. But it is, at the same time, it does fuel me, and it has impacted for sure the way that I parent and the way that I do everything. So
It's
yeah.
it's different of it being like something we use as a crutch, you know, than
Mm-hmm.
something that we use as a launching pad to help
Right.
others. That's
That's
the
a good way
difference.
of putting it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so for you, your experience became a launching pad for you to impact other people's lives rather than it becoming a, a crutch, woe is me kind of
Right.
component. It
That's
became
true.
of empowering others in their journey. So that's I think the difference in terms of how it is defining your life, but just in a different
In
way.
a different
So
way. I
in a
think you're right.
different way. That's how I feel, at least from my experience as well. And I feel a responsibility to do that. I feel like we don't go through things just, to go through things. We go through things in order to learn from them and then help others as well. If not, then it's kind of was for granted, like
Hmm.
the experiences went for granted. So
Hmm.
thank you once again, Emma.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me, Kendra. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.